"You wretched thing! You will never be part of this family, and that child of yours is going to be a disgrace," my mother-in-law shrieked, striking me hard in the stomach in front of all her guests. I slowly rose from the floor, straightened up, and calmly took an envelope from the pocket of my dress. I handed it to her. When she looked inside, her face drained of all color, and a moment later she crumpled to the floor, unconscious. But to understand how we got to that point, we have to go back. Back to 3 years ago, when my life was completely different. Welcome to Betty's Stories. I share new life stories here every day, and I'd really appreciate it if you hit subscribe and liked my video. Now let's jump back into my story. I'm sure you'll love it if you keep listening till the end. My name is Naomi. I'm 32 years old, and I work as an accountant for a construction firm in Atlanta. My life has always been straightforward and honest. My parents are college professors. My father, Stanley, teaches advanced math, and my mother, Gail, teaches philosophy. We lived in a modest 2-bedroom condo in Decatur, where books were valued more than expensive possessions, and family dinners were spent debating literature and science. I never dreamed of wealth. I wanted to find a man I could talk to about anything, someone who shared my values and with whom I could build a strong family. And I found him. Elijah, or Eli as I call him, came into my life unexpectedly. We met at a contemporary art exhibition. I was there with a friend, and he was standing in front of an abstract painting, passionately explaining something about color theory to his friend. I couldn't help but listen in. After the exhibit, we talked for hours at a coffee shop. Eli was an architect working at a major design bureau downtown. He was smart, well-read, and had a great sense of humor. We dated for almost a year before he first spoke seriously about his mother. Before that, he'd only mentioned her in passing, and I sensed a certain tension in his voice whenever his family came up. "My mother, she's not an easy person," he said one evening as we walked along the Beltline. "She's very demanding. She has a very specific view of what life should be like and what kind of people should be in it." I didn't think much of it then. I assumed she was just a strict woman with rigid principles. How wrong I was. My first meeting with my future mother-in-law took place at her house, or rather her mansion, a sprawling 2-story estate in a gated community in Buckhead, complete with a meticulous garden and a fountain. I was stunned by the sheer scale of it. Eli had never mentioned that his family was this wealthy. Vivian Dubois met us in the living room, which felt more like a museum gallery. Crystal chandeliers, antique furniture, and paintings in gilded frames. She was a tall, statuesque woman in her 50s, with an immaculate hairstyle, a pricey designer suit, and a cold look in her gray eyes. "So this is Naomi," she said. Her voice was level, but there was an underlying quality that made me tense up. She scrutinized me from head to toe, as if assessing merchandise in a shop. "Elijah has told me a lot about you." I extended my hand to shake hers, but she only grazed my fingers with the tips of hers before quickly pulling back. During dinner, Vivian Dubois maintained a polite conversation, but every question was a test. Where did I go to school? A state university, not a prestigious one. What did my parents do? Professors, what kind of place did we live in? A regular 2-bedroom condo? With every answer, her lips pressed tighter into a thin line. "You understand, Naomi," she said when Eli stepped out to take a phone call. "My son could have chosen anyone. He has a brilliant education, a promising career. He comes from a good family. I always envisioned him with a girl from the appropriate circle." I felt my insides clench, but I tried to maintain my composure. "Vivian Dubois, I love your son, and I truly hope we can find common ground." She offered a chilly smile. "We shall see. Love is lovely, but marriage requires far more, especially when my son is involved." When we left, Eli apologized the entire ride home. He said his mother was just accustomed to a certain lifestyle and that she needed time. I wanted to believe him, but as time passed, Vivian Dubois's attitude never softened. Every meeting became an ordeal. She constantly compared me to Chanel Ellington, the daughter of her longtime friend who owned a chain of luxury boutiques. Chanel was her ideal daughter-in-law. From a wealthy family, a graduate of a European university, and a model-like appearance. "You know, Eli, Chanel just returned from Paris," Vivienne Dubois would announce during one of our family dinners, completely ignoring my presence. "She is so refined now, and Cynthia Price says she's still single. Can you imagine, with her background?" Eli would grow tense, trying to change the subject, but his mother was relentless. She could spend an hour detailing Chanel's achievements, how she understood art, spoke 3 languages fluently, and dressed with such elegance. Later, when Chanel happened to be at the same social event as us, Vivienne Dubois would stage a full performance. She would introduce us, highlighting every one of Chanel's merits and every one of my perceived shortcomings. "Naomi is an accountant," she would say in a tone that made it sound shameful. "And Chanel manages the international purchasing division for her mother's company. That requires such vision, such connections." Chanel would offer a forced smile. I could tell she was uncomfortable with the comparisons. She was a beautiful girl, that was true, but her eyes held a certain emptiness. Talking to her was dull. She only discussed fashion, expensive resorts, and society events. But to Vivienne Dubois, none of that mattered. All that mattered was status, money, and connections. I knew she owned a network of 11 high-end beauty salons throughout the city, each in a prestigious district. The business was profitable, and Vivienne Dubois was proud of her standing in Atlanta society. She was a board member for several major charities, and her photos regularly appeared in the city's society magazines. 18 months into our relationship, Eli proposed. We were sitting on the rooftop of his office building, watching the sunset over the city, and he pulled out a small box with a ring. "Naomi, I want to spend my entire life with you. You are smart, kind, and real. I feel like myself when I'm with you. Marry me." I said yes without a second thought. I loved this man, and I believed that together we could handle any difficulty. When we told Vivienne Dubois about the engagement, her face contorted for a moment, but she quickly composed herself. "Well, congratulations," she said, her voice icy. "Elijah, I need to speak with you alone." They were closed in her study for nearly an hour. I heard their raised voices through the door. When Eli emerged, he was pale and stressed. "Mom thinks we're rushing things," he said quietly. "And what did you tell her?" "That I love you, and we are getting married." But the wedding turned into a nightmare. Vivienne Dubois sabotaged all our plans. We wanted a small, intimate ceremony. She insisted on a lavish affair. We chose a simple venue for the reception. She would book the most expensive restaurant and then cancel the reservation a day before. We looked for a photographer. She hired her own, who, in the end, took pictures in such a way that I wasn't even visible in half the photos. On the wedding day, she showed up wearing a black dress. She sat the entire evening with a stone-cold face, didn't give a single toast, and offered no congratulations. When guests asked how she was feeling, she would dramatically reply, "I'm simply worried about my son's future." The first few months of marriage, we lived in my small one-bedroom apartment. Eli wanted to rent something bigger, but I insisted we save for a down payment on a mortgage first. We both worked, put money aside, and made plans. Vivienne Dubois called our apartment a hovel. She would show up unannounced and criticize everything, from the paint color to the dishware. One time, I caught her in our bedroom, looking through the items in my closet. "I just wanted to see what conditions my son is living in," she replied nonchalantly. Then, I found out I was pregnant. Eli and I were overjoyed. He immediately became protective, bringing me breakfast in bed, accompanying me to every doctor's appointment, and reading books on pregnancy and childbirth. When we gave his mother the news, I expected her to soften, even slightly. After all, this was her grandchild, the continuation of her line. But Vivienne Dubois looked at me with such contempt that I felt chilled. "A baby," she dragged out the word, "in that studio apartment, on your salaries? Elijah, do you realize what you've taken on?" "Mom, we'll manage. Plenty of families raise children in smaller homes." "Plenty of families." She said the words as if they were an insult. "My grandchild will not live in poverty, although with a mother like that, I don't know what else to expect." I felt the anger rising inside me, but I held it in check. Eli placed a hand on my shoulder. "Mom, please, don't talk like that. I'm speaking the truth. And the truth, Elijah, is that if you had married Chanel, you would already have a custom home, a secured life, a future. What do you have now? You're living paycheck to paycheck." With every passing month of the pregnancy, the situation worsened. Vivienne Dubois seemed to deliberately invent ways to hurt me more deeply. She would buy us baby things, only to say in front of everyone, "Of course, these aren't the brands I dreamed of for my grandchild, but what can you do? One has to adjust to the parent's level." She'd invite us to family dinners attended by her high society friends, and she'd find a way to humiliate me every time. "Naomi is a simple girl," she'd say with a sweet smile that never reached her eyes. "She's never even been to Europe. Can you believe it? Elijah took her to the Caribbean, an all-inclusive resort, and she thought that was world travel." Eli tried to defend me, but his mother was a master manipulator. She played the role of the offended mother, the one whom her ungrateful son placed beneath his wife. After every conflict, she would throw a fit, complain about her heart, and dramatically take a pill right in front of Eli. He would soften, apologize, and plead with me to be patient. "Please, Nay, she's my mother. It's hard for her to accept that I've grown up. Just give her time." But time passed, and Vivienne Dubois showed no signs of changing. In fact, the closer the due date got, the more aggressive she became. In my 6th month of pregnancy, I accidentally saw a text exchange between Vivienne Dubois and Chanel Ellington. Eli's mother had forgotten her phone at our place after one of her visits. The screen lit up with a new message. I saw the text. "Chanel, darling, don't worry. I am certain this marriage won't last long. Eli will realize his mistake soon. You need to be ready." I didn't read any further. I simply put the phone back down and sat there for a long time, staring out the window. My mother-in-law wasn't just failing to accept me, she was actively working to destroy our marriage. That night, I made a decision. I wouldn't tolerate the humiliation anymore, but I also wouldn't stoop to scenes or hysterics. I would act smarter. A week later, during another visit to her mansion, I excused myself and went to the restroom. Passing by Vivienne Dubois's home office, I noticed the door was slightly ajar. Usually it was always locked. I wasn't planning anything, but something made me pause on the threshold. On the desk lay an open folder of documents. I saw the name of one of her salons and columns of figures. The accountant in me automatically began to analyze what I saw. And what I saw made my heart pound faster. The numbers in the internal reports did not match those in the official documents. The revenue figures were significantly understated. I'd been working long enough to recognize it instantly. This was black market bookkeeping. I quickly pulled out my phone and photographed several pages. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it could be heard throughout the house, but I managed to put the documents back and exit the office before anyone noticed. I spent the next week studying financial legislation. I consulted with an attorney who specialized in tax law, a friend of my father's, and showed him the photos. His verdict was unequivocal. If these documents were genuine, Vivienne Dubois was engaged in felony tax evasion. She was facing not only a massive fine, but real prison time. I gathered evidence slowly, methodically. I found ways to access other records. Vivienne Dubois was so confident in her invulnerability that she didn't bother to hide her tracks well. She had connections. She thought she was untouchable. But she didn't have proof against me, and I had proof against her. Eli knew nothing. I couldn't tell him. He loved his mother despite all her flaws. It would have torn him apart. But I swore to myself, if she dared to humiliate me one more time, I would use everything I had collected. And in my 7th month of pregnancy, Vivienne Dubois invited us to a large fundraiser at her home. She said it was a charity gala, that important people would be there, and she wanted the whole family present. I didn't want to go. I felt exhausted. My stomach was large, my feet were swollen, but Eli pleaded, "Please, Mom is trying to fix things." He was so naive. He still believed she would change. The mansion was packed with guests, the city's elite, business leaders, public figures. Vivienne Dubois was radiant, accepting compliments and demonstrating her success. I sat in a corner, feeling out of place in my simple black maternity dress. All the other women were in evening gowns with expensive jewelry and flawless makeup. About an hour into the reception, Vivienne Dubois approached me. Beside her were 3 of her friends, equally groomed, polished ladies with condescending faces. "Naomi, darling," she cooed. Her voice was as sweet as honey, but I had learned to hear the venom beneath the sugar. "Meet my closest friends, Cynthia Price, Margaret Olson, and Brenda Wells. Ladies, this is my son's wife." The women gave me evaluating glances. I stood up, feeling my back muscles tighten from sitting so long. "It's a pleasure." I extended my hand, but none of them shook it. "Vivienne Dubois told us so much about you," one of the women drawled, looking me over with thinly veiled curiosity. "She said you come from a very modest background." "My parents are professors," I replied evenly. "Oh, how noble," another woman faux adored. "So few choose intellectual professions these days, although, of course, it's not the most highly compensated field." Vivienne Dubois smiled, savoring my discomfort. "Naomi works as an accountant," she added, "at some construction company. Of course, Eli could support his family entirely, but Naomi insists on working, so independent." The sarcasm in her tone was so thick that even other guests noticed it. "I believe it's important for a woman to have her own income and not be dependent on her husband," I said, trying to remain calm. Of course," Vivienne Dubois waved her hand dismissively. "Though you know, ladies, I always thought Eli would marry a girl from our circle. I had such a marvelous candidate, Chanel, Cynthia's daughter. Remember, Cynthia, how lovely they looked together at that fundraiser 3 years ago?" "Oh, yes," Cynthia Price chimed in. "Chanel is still unmarried, by the way. Such a beautiful girl, such prospects, and still alone." I felt fury boiling inside me, but I remained silent. I clenched my fists so tightly that my nails dug into my palms. But what can one do? Vivienne Dubois sighed theatrically. "Youth, love, hormones. Eli didn't listen to me. Now they're living in a small apartment, counting pennies and expecting a baby. I hope the grandchild is at least healthy, though with those genetics." She didn't finish the sentence, but the implication was crystal clear. I felt something snap inside me. "Vivienne Dubois." My voice was quiet but firm. "I understand you think I'm unworthy of your son. You've made that clear since our first meeting, but I ask you not to insult my unborn child." "Insult?" She feigned surprise. "I'm merely expressing concern. Children often inherit not just their parents' looks, but their limitations and their social standing." The room grew quiet. Guests stopped talking, watching the scene. Eli, standing at the other end of the room, heard the shift in atmosphere and started making his way toward us. "Mom, what are you talking about?" He reached us, seeing my pale face and his mother's strained expression. "I'm speaking to your wife about reality, Elijah. The reality that a child born into poverty to a mother of questionable background is unlikely to achieve much in life. It's statistics, darling." "Stop it, now!" Eli raised his voice, and more heads turned. But Vivienne Dubois couldn't stop. Years of suppressed contempt burst forth. "You married a pauper, Elijah. She and her little family latched onto you for your money, for your connections, for the advantage. You are too blind to see it, and now she's going to give you a child, the same kind of loser as herself." The room froze. Everyone was staring at us. I felt my hands trembling, my throat tightening with indignation and rage. Vivienne Dubois took a step toward me. Her face was distorted with malice. "You wretched thing! You will never be part of this family, and that child of yours is going to be a—" She swung her arm and struck me in the stomach, a sharp, piercing pain. I doubled over, clutching my abdomen, and fell to the floor. Gasps erupted around us, and someone screamed. Eli rushed toward me, but I was already pushing myself up, gripping the edge of a nearby table. Slowly, very slowly, I straightened. I looked at my mother-in-law, who stood there, her face contorted with fury, breathing heavily. and I calmly took an envelope from the pocket of my dress. The envelope I had carried with me for the past 2 weeks, waiting for the perfect moment. I extended it to Vivienne Dubois. "This is for you." My voice was steady, cold. "I think you'll find the contents interesting." She snatched the envelope, tore it open, pulled out the documents, and began to read. I watched as the color slowly drained from her face, how her eyes widened, how her hands trembled as they held the papers. They were copies of the notice from the IRS regarding the launch of a major audit into her salons. Copies of the complaint filed with federal authorities regarding suspicions of felony tax evasion in the amount of over $2.5 million. And copies of the photographs of her fraudulent accounting, the very ones I took in her home office. Vivienne Dubois looked up at me. Her eyes were filled with shock, horror, and terror. "You... how dare you?" But she couldn't finish her sentence. She stumbled, the documents fell from her hands, and she collapsed onto the floor, unconscious. Panic erupted in the ballroom. Someone was shouting for a doctor or calling 911. My mother-in-law's friends fussed frantically around her body. Eli looked at me, confusion in his eyes, but I stood there calmly, one hand resting on my stomach where his mother had just hit me. And for the first time in 3 years, I felt that control was in my hands. The paramedics arrived in under 15 minutes. They revived Vivienne Dubois, checked her blood pressure and pulse. She opened her eyes, and the first thing she did was look at me. The hatred in her gaze was chilling. You, she croaked, trying to get up. The paramedics restrained her, trying to calm her down. The guests were leaving, murmuring amongst themselves. The charity gala had turned into a scandal that would be the talk of Atlanta by morning. Eli took my hand. "We need to leave. Right now." We walked out of the mansion under the stunned gaze of the remaining guests. A heavy silence settled in the car. Eli drove, gripping the steering wheel so hard his knuckles were white. "What was that, Nay?" he finally asked, once we were a safe distance away. "What documents did you give her?" I took a deep breath. I knew this conversation was inevitable. "Your mother is running a double set of books in her salons. She's evading taxes. I accidentally saw the documents 2 months ago when I was at her house. I gathered evidence and filed a complaint with the IRS and the federal authorities." Eli slammed on the brakes. He pulled over, turned off the engine, and faced me. "What have you done?" His voice was shaking. "That's my mother, Nay. How could you?" "How could I?" I felt a surge of adrenaline and fury. "Eli, your mother just struck me in the stomach. Me, 7 months pregnant. She called me a wretched thing in front of all her friends, said our child would be a disgrace. And you're asking how I could? File a police report? Nay, that's a crime." "Yes, it is a crime," I raised my voice. "Her crime. She broke the law for years, cheated the government, and didn't pay taxes. I merely provided evidence to the law enforcement agencies. It was my civic duty." "That was revenge," he said quietly. "That was justice," I countered. "And self-defense. Eli, I put up with it for 3 years. I put up with the humiliation, the insults, the condescension. I stayed silent when she compared me to other women, when she tried to ruin our wedding, when she called our home a hovel. I swallowed all of it for you, for our marriage. But when she raised her hand against my child, our child, I had every right to protect myself." Eli was silent, staring out the windshield. I could see the muscles in his jaw working. "You should have told me. And what would you have done? You would have asked me not to hurt your mother. You would have begged me to give her another chance. Eli, you've given her chances your whole life. She still treats people like dirt." He turned to me sharply. "She is my mother. And I am your wife. And this is our child." I placed my hand on my belly. "Who do you choose, Eli? The woman who just assaulted your pregnant wife? Or your family?" The silence stretched long. I watched him struggle, torn between his duty as a son and his duty as a husband. Finally, he let out a weary sigh. "Let's go home." We drove the rest of the way in silence, At home, Eli immediately went to shower, and I sat on the sofa, still trembling from the stress. I checked my phone. Over 20 missed calls, all from my mother-in-law and her relatives. I muted the phone. When Eli emerged, he looked exhausted. He sat next to me and was silent for a long time. "I need time to process this," he finally said. "It's too much. I didn't expect things to turn out this way." "I understand," I replied. "But know this. I don't regret what I did. And if I had to choose again, I would do the same thing, because protecting my family from toxicity is the right thing to do." That night, we slept on opposite sides of the bed. I couldn't sleep for a long time, the events of the evening replaying in my mind. My hand rested on my stomach, and I felt the baby kicking inside. "Everything will be fine," I whispered. "I will protect you from everyone." In the morning, my mother called. It turned out one of the guests from the fundraiser knew my parents and had already told them about the scandal. "Naomi, what happened?" My mother's voice, Gail, was anxious. "Brenda called us, said she saw you at some society event where a terrible scene took place." I told her everything. Mom listened in silence, occasionally gasping. "My daughter," she said when I finished, "you did the right thing. No one has the right to lay a hand on a pregnant woman. No one. And the fact that you collected evidence of her fraud is not revenge. It's upholding the law. Let Eli struggle, but he needs to understand that his mother is entirely to blame." The conversation with my mother calmed me slightly. Dad, Stanley, also got on the phone and said he was proud of me. "You showed character, my Naomi. Not every woman is capable of standing up for herself the way you did." 3 days later, the police came. 2 investigators and official witnesses. They presented a warrant to search Vivian Dubois's Buckhead mansion. Eli was at work, and I didn't call him. I knew he was suffering enough. The investigators were polite but thorough. They confiscated my mother-in-law's computer, folders of documents, flash drives, and even some notebooks. The entire search was videotaped. Vivian Dubois sat on the living room sofa, pale and looking 10 years older. When the investigators left, she called Eli. I overheard their conversation. He put it on speaker. "Elijah, my son, I need your help." Her voice was plaintive, unlike anything I had ever heard. "Your wife set me up. This is all lies, a provocation. I need a good lawyer. I need money to pay him." "Mom, I can't." "How can you not? I'm your mother. I gave birth to you, raised you, gave you everything." "Mom, you hit my pregnant wife. You called her the foulest names in public, and you genuinely broke the law. This is your choice, your responsibility." "Elijah!" Her voice grew hysterical. "You're choosing this cheap girl over your own mother?" "I am choosing my family, and I'm asking you not to call me again." He hung up the phone. I saw his hands trembling, his jaw clenched. I walked over and hugged him. Eli pulled me close and quietly said, I'm sorry I didn't protect you sooner. I'm sorry I was weak." "You're not weak," I answered. "You just love your mother. That's normal. But sometimes loving someone means letting them face the consequences of their actions." The following weeks were difficult. Eli's relatives attacked us with calls and messages, aunts, uncles, cousins, all demanding that I drop the complaint, accusing me of destroying the family and betrayal. Aunt Carol, in particular, was relentless. She drove to our apartment, pounded on the door, and screamed through it, "Come out, Snake! You ruined your mother-in-law's life! How do you sleep at night?" I didn't open the door. I called the police and filed a report for harassment. The visits stopped, but the online bullying started. Someone in the family posted my photo on social media with the caption, "This woman turned her mother-in-law over to the police." Comments poured in, some supportive, others accusing me of cruelty and calculation. Eli deleted all his accounts. I made mine private. We essentially hid from the outside world, protecting our small island of peace. I regularly saw my doctor. After that blow to the abdomen, I was plagued by fears that something was wrong with the baby. But the doctor reassured me, "The baby is fine, Naomi. The heartbeat is excellent, development is on schedule, but you need rest, avoid stress." Easy to say, avoid stress, when your mother-in-law is under investigation and you are the main witness for the prosecution. A month after the search, Vivienne Dubois was called in for questioning. Her lawyer was with her, but it did little good. The investigation had built an extensive case. It turned out her fraud was even more massive than I had thought. She had not only underreported revenue, but also paid employees partly under the table, failed to officially register many of them, and used shell companies to register property. The total amount of loss to the state exceeded $23 million. This was no longer a civil case. It was a major criminal felony, large-scale, organized scheme, and long duration. Vivienne Dubois was released on her own recognizance, which meant she couldn't leave the city until the investigation concluded. Authorities also froze her accounts and assets. News of this spread quickly through Atlanta, as Vivienne Dubois was a well-known figure in local business circles. Newspapers wrote about the high-profile tax evasion case. TV stations ran segments. Her former friends, those same society ladies who were at the ill-fated fundraiser, now distanced themselves from her. "We had no idea," they were quoted as saying. "She always seemed like a respectable woman. We are shocked by what happened." Hypocrisy in its purest form. My mother-in-law tried to contact Eli through her lawyer, sending messages that she wanted to meet, talk, and explain, but Eli refused. He had made his choice, and it hadn't been easy for him. I saw how much he suffered. At night, he would often wake up, sitting in the kitchen for a long time, staring out the window. One night, I found him there at 3 a.m. with a cup of cold tea. "Can't sleep?" I sat down next to him. "Thinking about Mom," he said, looking at me with tired eyes. "She wasn't always like this. When I was a kid, she was different, caring, attentive. Dad died when I was 12. Mom was left alone and built that business from scratch. I guess something broke in her then. She became hard, obsessed with money and status." "Eli, hard circumstances don't justify bad behavior." I took his hand. "Many people lose loved ones, go through difficulties, but they don't become cruel. Your mother made a choice to break the law, a choice to humiliate people, a choice to value money more than human dignity. I know, rationally I understand, but she's still my mother. And it's okay to love her no matter what. But loving her doesn't mean letting her destroy your life. It doesn't mean sacrificing your own family for her whim." He nodded, but I could see it was still difficult for him. The investigation continued. I was called in for questioning several times as a witness. I recounted how I found the documents, exactly what I saw, and how I gathered the evidence. The investigators were professional and courteous. Vivienne Dubois' lawyer tried to discredit me, suggesting I acted out of personal revenge and that I had illegally trespassed into her office and violated her privacy. But my own attorney easily deflected these attacks. My client accidentally discovered the documents while lawfully present in her mother-in-law's home as a member of the family. Upon witnessing evidence of a crime, she fulfilled her civic duty by reporting it to the competent authorities. No illegal acts were committed. Gradually, my fear began to recede. I realized I had done the right thing, that the law was on my side, and most importantly, Eli was with me. He had changed during these months. He became tougher, more confident, and stopped being afraid of what other people thought. When colleagues at work whispered and gossiped about his mother's situation, he would say directly, "My mother broke the law. She will face the penalty she deserves. I have no reason to hide or justify it." That honesty commanded respect. Slowly, the gossip died down, and people started treating him normally again. I went on maternity leave in my 8th month. The doctor said the birth would be on time. Everything was fine. Eli and I set up a corner for the baby in our small apartment. We bought a crib, a stroller, and clothes. Not the most expensive brands, but high quality and sweet. My parents came to help. They were excited about the upcoming arrival of their granddaughter. At the last ultrasound, we learned it was a girl. Eli wanted to name her Simone, and I agreed. A beautiful, bright name. A week before the estimated due date, I was summoned by the prosecution. The case was ready to go to trial. The lead prosecutor wanted to clarify some details of my testimony. I went with Eli. He insisted that he wouldn't let me go alone, especially so late in my pregnancy. We were sitting in the waiting area and suddenly I saw her. Vivian Dubois walked out of an office with her lawyer. She had aged terribly in those months. Her hair was gray, her face drawn, with deep shadows under her eyes. The expensive suit now hung loosely on her frame. She had lost a lot of weight. Our eyes met. Her gaze held such hatred, such pain and malice that I instinctively turned away, covering my abdomen with my hand. "Elijah!" she called out. Her voice was hoarse, broken. Eli stood up. "Mom? Son, please, you have to help me. You have to talk to her to drop the complaint. Please, I'll do anything. Mom, it's too late. The case is already going to trial. But she can say she made a mistake, that she misunderstood." "Mom, you genuinely ran a double set of books. That is a fact. The prosecution has all the evidence." Vivian Dubois took a step toward us. Her lawyer tried to stop her, but she broke free. "This is all her fault. She jabbed a finger in my direction. "That wretched girl ruined my life. I hope you regret ever getting involved with her." "Vivian Dubois, please calm down." The lawyer took her by the elbow. "You are only making your situation worse." Eli stepped forward, shielding me. "Mom, leave now." The steel in his voice surprised even me. Vivian Dubois recoiled, then spun around and quickly marched toward the exit, hunched over and shuffling her feet. The lawyer nodded an apologetic goodbye to us and hurried after her. I let out a breath. My hands were shaking. "It's okay." Eli put his arms around my shoulders. "She can't hurt you anymore." The questioning went quickly. I confirmed my statements and signed the protocol. The prosecutor said the trial was scheduled for the following month. "You will be needed as a witness," he explained, "but given your condition, the court may allow you to testify via video link or in a modified procedure." "I want to be present in person," I said firmly, "if, of course, the baby hasn't arrived by then." Eli squeezed my hand. Labor started 2 days earlier than expected. I woke up in the night with a sharp pain in my lower abdomen. Contractions. We called 911, and I was taken to the hospital. Eli was by my side the entire time, holding my hand, wiping the sweat from my brow, and encouraging me. The labor was long, nearly 8 hours, but when the first cry of our daughter finally rang out, I forgot all the pain. "A girl! 7 pounds, 8 ounces, and 20 inches long," the midwife announced. "APGAR score of 9, a healthy beauty." They placed the baby on my chest. A tiny wrinkled face, a shock of dark hair, eyes tightly shut. Perfection. "Simone," I whispered, "our little Sonny." Eli kissed my forehead, my cheeks, my hands. Tears were in his eyes. "Thank you," he repeated. "Thank you." My parents came into the room. Mom was crying with happiness. Dad couldn't take his eyes off his granddaughter. "She looks just like you at that age," Mom said, examining Simone. I thought about my mother-in-law's curse. The baby will be a disgrace, and here she was, a perfectly healthy, beautiful girl. No curses, only love and happiness. Eli decided not to inform his mother about Simone's birth. "I don't want her to know," he said, "at least not until the trial is over." I understood him. Vivian Dubois might use the news of her granddaughter for manipulation, to try to make her son feel guilty. We didn't need that. The trial began a month after Simone was born. I was breastfeeding, so I brought the baby with me. My mother came along to stay with Simone in the hallway while I gave my testimony. The courtroom was packed. Journalists were there. The case was highly publicized. Vivian Dubois's relatives sat in the front rows, throwing hostile glances my way. I stood straight, not lowering my gaze. Vivian Dubois sat at the defense table with her lawyer. She was in a severe dark suit, her hair pulled back in a bun. She maintained a look of dignity, but I could see her hands shaking. The judge read the charges, a long list of felony counts, including tax evasion on a major scale, unlawful business practices, and document forgery. Each count carried a maximum sentence of up to 6 years in prison. The witness questioning began. Employees from the beauty salons were called first. They described receiving part of their pay in cash envelopes, how they were instructed to be silent during inspections, and how the real revenue was triple the official amount. Then the IRS investigator testified, explaining the fraud schemes in detail, showing documents, and comparing figures. Then it was my turn. I stood up, walked to the witness stand, placed my hand on the Bible, and swore to tell the truth. I sat down. The prosecutor asked questions clearly and to the point. I recounted how I discovered the documents, exactly what I saw, how I consulted with an attorney, and how I gathered additional evidence. "Tell us, witness," the prosecutor asked, "what was your motivation for reporting this to the law enforcement authorities?" I looked directly at Vivian Dubois. "I was protecting my family. The defendant systematically humiliated me, insulted me, and tried to destroy my marriage. The culmination was the evening when she physically assaulted me, a 7-month pregnant woman, in the abdomen and cursed my unborn child. At that moment, I realized I could not tolerate it any further, and I used the only lawful means I had." Vivian Dubois' lawyer jumped up. "Objection! The witness is attempting to justify her actions as personal revenge." "Overruled," the judge said calmly. "The witness's motivation does not change the fact that the defendant committed a crime. Proceed." The defense attorney began his cross-examination, trying to nitpick the details and find contradictions. But I was prepared. I answered clearly without emotion, relying only on the facts. "You entered the defendant's private office without her permission." "I was in my mother-in-law's house as a member of the family, at her invitation. The office door was open. I accidentally saw documents on the table." "You photographed private papers." "I photographed documents containing evidence of a crime. Under the Constitution, every citizen is obligated to report crimes that have been or are about to be committed." The lawyer changed tactics, but I remained firm. Finally, the judge dismissed me, and I returned to the hallway where my mother and Simone were. The baby was sleeping peacefully in her stroller, cooing softly. I picked her up and held her close. This was my reward, my reason to fight. The trial lasted 3 days. Experts, accountants, and more witnesses were called. The picture that emerged was complete and damning. Vivian Dubois had cheated the government for years, misappropriating millions that should have gone to schools, hospitals, and roads. At the final session, the defendant herself took the stand. She stood up straight. "I admit that I made mistakes in running my business." Her voice was firm, yet tinged with bitterness. "But I will never forgive the one who ruined my life out of revenge. That woman," she nodded toward me, "infiltrated my family, deceived my son, and destroyed my business, my name, and now she plays the heroine. But I know the truth. She is a calculating, cold-blooded snake." The judge banged his gavel. "Defendant, stick to the subject. Your personal relations with family members have no bearing on this case." Vivian Dubois sat down, her lips pressed tight. The judge retired for deliberation. We waited for almost 2 hours. Finally, the verdict was announced. The defendant is found guilty of felony tax evasion. Sentencing is determined to be a period of incarceration of 4 years in a federal minimum security facility. The defendant is ordered to pay restitution to the government in the amount of $23 million. The defendant's assets will remain frozen until the debt is fully satisfied. Vivian Dubois turned pale. Her relatives leapt from their seats, shouting. Security called for order. The lawyer was speaking to his client, but she wasn't listening. She just sat there, staring into the void. I stood up and headed for the exit. Eli put his arm around my shoulders. My mother pushed Simone's stroller. We walked out of the courthouse amid camera flashes and the shouts of journalists. "Naomi, are you satisfied with the verdict? Do you plan to communicate with your mother-in-law after her release? Do you regret your actions?" I stopped and turned toward the cameras. "Justice has prevailed," I said. "I regret nothing." And we walked on without looking back. 6 months passed after the trial. Vivian Dubois was serving her sentence somewhere in the region. Eli and I tried not to think about her, to live our own lives and raise our daughter. Simone was an amazing baby, calm, cheerful, and curious. At 5 months, she was already rolling over. At 6, she could sit with support. The doctors said her development was excellent, with no delays. Every time I looked at her healthy, rosy face, I remembered my mother-in-law's curse and smiled. No wicked words had power over our little girl. Eli and I moved into a 2-bedroom apartment. We didn't buy it, we rented. The price was high for our budget, but we needed more space. One room became the nursery, the other our bedroom. A small kitchen, a single bathroom. Nothing extravagant, but it was our home, clean of toxic memories. I started working remotely. My company allowed me to work from home, handling reports, checking documents, and consulting with colleagues online. This allowed me to be with my daughter and bring in an income. Eli got a promotion at his design bureau and was now managing a department. His salary increased, but we still lived modestly, saving every month for the future. "We're saving for that down payment," Eli would say, looking through apartment listings. "Another year or so, and we can get a mortgage." My parents helped as much as they could. Mom would visit several times a week, watching Simone while I worked. Dad would bring groceries, fix things around the house, and play with his granddaughter. Their support was invaluable. We tried not to mention Vivienne Dubois, but sometimes it was impossible. Aunt Carol, my mother-in-law's sister, continued to call Eli, demanding that he visit his mother in prison. "Eli, she's your mother! How can you abandon her in a place like that?" "Aunt Carol, Mom chose her path. I am not obligated to pay for her crime." "But she's suffering. She lost everything." "She lost what she earned dishonestly, and she almost physically harmed my pregnant wife. I'm sorry, but I've made my choice." After such conversations, Eli would be gloomy all evening. I saw how hard it was for him, but he stood his ground, and I was proud of him. Vivienne Dubois's property was sold at auction. The mansion was bought by a couple of entrepreneurs. Her cars went to a collector. The antiques, paintings, and furniture were all sold off. The money went to pay off her debt to the government and the fines. The beauty salons were sold to another chain. The new owners rebranded them and changed the concept. There was no trace left of Vivienne Dubois's empire. Simone turned 1. We held a small celebration at our apartment with only the closest people. My parents, 2 of Eli's friends with their wives, and my childhood friend. We baked a cake, blew up balloons, and gave the baby developmental toys. Simone laughed, clapped her hands, and tried to blow out the candle on the cake. "Look what a beauty she's grown into," Mom said, kissing her granddaughter. "Our clever girl." Eli put his arm around my shoulders. "We made it," he whispered. "We did," I agreed. But deep down, I knew it wasn't quite over. Vivienne Dubois was due to be released in 3.5 years. What then? Would she try to re-enter our lives? The answer came sooner than I expected. 18 months after the trial, when Simone was 1.5 years old, Aunt Carol called. "Eli, your mother is getting out on parole. She needs a place to live next week." A long silence followed. Eli gripped the phone so hard his knuckles turned white. "And what are you suggesting?" "She can't return to her house. It was sold. She has no money for rent. Eli, she's your mother. You have to take her in." "No," he said firmly. "How can you say no? You're going to turn your own mother out onto the street? She can live with you or with other relatives, but not with us. That is my final decision." Aunt Carol screamed into the phone for a long time, but Eli simply hung up. "Are you sure?" I asked. He looked at me, then at Simone, who was playing with blocks on the carpet. "Absolutely. I will not let her into our daughter's life. I don't want Simone growing up under that toxic influence. Mom never apologized, never admitted she was wrong. She still sees herself as the victim. People like that don't change." We lived in tension for a week, expecting Vivienne Dubois to try to contact us, but there were no calls. Then I saw her. Simone and I were walking in a park near our apartment. It was a beautiful fall day. Golden leaves, warm sun. Our daughter was running along the paths, collecting acorns, laughing. I walked beside her, holding her hand, and suddenly I saw a familiar figure on a bench, Vivienne Dubois. She looked entirely different, aged, stooped, wearing a cheap jacket and faded jeans. Her hair was cut short and gray, and her face was lined with deep wrinkles. Nothing remained of the majestic, polished lady she used to be. Our eyes met. She rose from the bench and took a step toward us. "Naomi." I stopped, instinctively pulling Simone close. My daughter buried her face in my skirt, sensing my tension. "Vivienne Dubois?" She looked at Simone with a hungry, painful gaze. "Is that my granddaughter?" "No. This is my daughter. Eli doesn't want to see me. He won't pick up the phone. I tried to come to your apartment, but the doorman wouldn't let me in." "He made the right choice." Vivienne Dubois took another step. "Please, I just want to see her. She's my blood." "You lost the right to call her yours the moment you struck me when I was pregnant and cursed my child." Her face twisted. "I was angry. I wasn't thinking." "You were thinking. You always think everything through. You wanted to hurt me, and you succeeded. But now, the consequences have caught up to you. And that is justice." "Justice?" Her voice became hysterical. "Is it justice that I lost everything, my home, my business, my reputation? That I spent a year in hell where I was treated like a criminal? You were a criminal. You broke the law for years." "Because of you!" she shouted, and several passers-by turned their heads. "It's all because of you! If it weren't for you, Eli would have married a decent girl. He would have had a good life." Simone was frightened and began to cry. I picked her up and held her close. "Vivienne Dubois, step away from us. Now." "Or what? You'll go to the police again? Ruin my life again?" "I will protect my daughter by any means necessary. If you don't leave right now, I will call the police." She stared at me with a long look full of hatred and despair. Then she spun around abruptly and shuffled away, hunched and dragging her feet. I stood there, comforting the crying Simone, my hands shaking. This wasn't a victory, it was simply a sad necessity. That evening, I told Eli about the encounter. He went pale. "She's looking for us. This is serious. What do you want to do?" He was silent for a long time, staring out the window. "I need to meet with her. One time. To put a final end to it." The meeting was scheduled for 3 days later at a neutral coffee shop downtown. Eli insisted that I come with him. We left Simone with my parents. Vivienne Dubois was already sitting at a table when we arrived. A cup of cold coffee sat in front of her. She looked up when she saw us, and I saw a flash of hope in her eyes. "Elijah, my son." We sat down across from her. Eli was tense, his hands clenched into fists under the table. "Mom, we are here to talk. For the last time." "The last time?" Her voice cracked. "Elijah, I'm your mother. You can't just erase me from your life. You erased yourself. When you hit my pregnant wife, when you humiliated her for years, when you broke the law, I made a mistake." She reached out across the table, trying to touch his fingers, but he pulled back. "I was blind. I didn't want to lose you. You are my only son, my life." "And when you chose her," Eli said, "I chose love. I chose honesty. I chose a person who doesn't play games, doesn't manipulate, and doesn't lie." Vivienne Dubois looked at me. "You turned him against me." "No," I replied calmly. "You turned him against yourself with your actions." "I have nowhere to live." Her voice became pitiful. "I have no money. All my assets were taken. I'm living with Aunt Carol in a small apartment, sleeping on a cot. Eli, help me. You're my son." "I will help," he said firmly. "I will transfer you money for rent, for the time being. But don't expect me to invite you into our lives." "But the granddaughter! I want to see my granddaughter. She's my blood." "No." Eli shook his head. "Simone will not know you. I don't want her growing up under your influence. I don't want her to see how you treat her mother. I don't want you to poison her childhood with your complexes and manipulations." Vivienne Dubois turned white. You are depriving me of my grandchild." "You deprived yourself of her," Eli said. The moment you struck my pregnant wife in the stomach and wished my child would be a disgrace. Do you remember those words, Mom? I do. They are burned into my memory, and I will never forgive you for them. I was angry. I wasn't in control. An adult is responsible for their words and actions. You were always a master of control. You controlled me my entire life. But now, for the first time, the control is mine, and I choose my family, my wife, and my daughter. And you will forever remain in the past. Vivienne Dubois covered her face with her hands. Her shoulders shook, but I felt no pity. She was crying over the loss of control, the loss of power, not over the pain she had caused. Mom, I will transfer you $4,000. Eli stood up. That will cover a few months' rent and expenses. After that, you are on your own. Find a job, rebuild your life, but without us. Goodbye. He took my hand, and we walked toward the exit. Vivienne Dubois called out to us. Elijah, son, please! But he didn't look back. We stepped outside, and he hugged me tightly. It's over. His voice was hoarse. I'm free. We're free, I corrected him. He kissed me on the temple. Thank you for being stronger than me. Thank you for protecting us both. Another year passed. Simone grew up, becoming a true little personality, talkative, funny, and curious. She loved books, drawing, and dancing. We enrolled her in a children's development center where she engaged with other kids. Eli received another promotion. He was now the deputy director of the design bureau. His salary increased significantly. We continued to save, living modestly, but we could see the light at the end of the tunnel. I returned to the office part-time. Simone went to a preschool in the mornings, and it did her good. She became more social and made her first friends. My parents were happy watching their granddaughter grow. Dad taught her to count to 10. Mom read her bedtime stories. We often gathered on weekends and holidays, our small, strong family. We hadn't heard from Vivienne Dubois again. Aunt Carol stopped calling after that coffee shop meeting. Sometimes I wondered how my mother-in-law was, but they were fleeting thoughts without regret. Another 6 months later, we finally saved enough for the down payment and started looking for an apartment. We viewed dozens of options. The neighborhood wasn't right, the layout was wrong, or the price was inflated. And finally, we found it. A 2-bedroom condo in a new development in the outskirts of the city. Not luxury, not downtown, but bright, warm, and with good amenities nearby. A school, a preschool, and a park. Perfect for a family with a child. We took out the mortgage. The interest rate was high, but we would manage. We signed the papers and got the keys. The day we moved into the new apartment was one of the happiest of my life. Bare walls, empty rooms, the smell of new construction. But it was ours, honestly earned, owing nothing to anyone else. Mom, this is our home! Simone ran through the empty apartment, her voice echoing off the walls. Yes, sweetie, our home. Eli hugged me from behind, resting his chin on my shoulder. We did it. We did. We did the renovations ourselves. On weekends, after work, and in the evenings, we painted walls, hung wallpaper, and assembled furniture. We were exhausted, but it was a good kind of fatigue, the fatigue of working for our own future. My parents helped. Dad put up the crown molding, Mom sewed the curtains. We bought simple furniture, not chasing brands. Functionality and comfort were our priorities. 3 months later, the renovations were complete. We hosted a housewarming party, inviting friends, colleagues, and neighbors. We set out a modest but plentiful spread. Homemade salads, roasted chicken, vegetables, and fruit. Simone helped arrange the plates, feeling important. To our home, Eli raised his glass. To our family, for going through the difficulties and becoming stronger. We clinked glasses. I looked at him, at our daughter, at our humble but beloved home, and I felt absolute happiness. 2 more years passed. Simone turned 5. She started kindergarten prep, learning to read, count, and draw. A talented, smart girl. Her teachers praised her, saying she grasped everything quickly. We continued to work, paying down the mortgage. We weren't rich, but we were stable. We could afford a vacation once a year. We usually rented a beach house and spent 2 weeks by the ocean. Simone loved the sea, spending hours building sandcastles and collecting shells. Eli became the director of the design bureau. His career was soaring, a result of his hard work, talent, and persistence, not his mother's connections or family wealth, but his own merit. I got a promotion at my company and was now managing a small department. My salary increased. We even started making extra payments on the mortgage to close it faster. One day, while we were walking in the park with Simone, she asked, "Mom, why don't I have a grandma on Daddy's side?" Maya at preschool has 2 grandmas. I looked at Eli. We knew this question would come up eventually. "Daddy had a mother," Eli said gently. "But she wasn't a very nice person. She hurt your mother, and we decided it was better if she wasn't part of our family." "Was she mean?" "She did bad things and didn't want to admit she was wrong." Simone pondered this. "Okay, at least I have Grandma Gail and Grandpa Stanley. They're nice." "Yes, sweetie, they love you very much. I love them too." She ran off toward the swings, having already forgotten the question. Children move on quickly. Eli took my hand. "Do you think we did the right thing, depriving her of a grandmother?" "We didn't deprive her. Your mother deprived herself of a granddaughter. And yes, we did the right thing. Simone is growing up in a healthy environment, without toxicity, without humiliation. Isn't that what matters most?" "It is," he agreed. We stood there, watching our daughter swing and laugh, waving to us. The sun was setting, painting the sky in pink and gold hues. It was quiet, peaceful, and harmonious. "You know," I said, "when I first met your mother, she looked at me like I was dirt on her shoe. She said I wasn't worthy of you, that I had no future, that our child would be a disgrace. Now look, we own our own condo. We have good jobs, a wonderful daughter. We are happy. And she? She lost everything by clinging to wealth and status." "Karma," Eli chuckled. "It really does exist." "Not karma. Consequences of choice. Your mother chose money, power, and control. We chose love, honesty, and dignity. And here we are." He kissed me on the top of my head. "I am so proud of you. You are the strongest woman I know." "I'm not strong. I just refuse to let anyone turn me into a victim." That evening, after Simone was asleep, Eli and I sat on the balcony, sipping tea, wrapped in warm blankets. We talked about the future, our plans, our dreams. "I want us to give Simone a good education," Eli said. "Not necessarily an elite one, but a quality one, so she has options. She will. That's what we work for. And I want us to teach her the most important thing, that character, honesty, and dignity are what make a person, not money. We'll teach her by example." We were silent for a while, looking at the city lights. "Sometimes I wonder," Eli whispered, "if you hadn't found those documents, hadn't filed the complaint, what would have happened to us? Mom would have kept poisoning our lives. I would have kept being torn between you. Simone would have grown up in an atmosphere of constant conflict." "Do you regret what I did?" "No. On the contrary, I'm grateful. You were brave enough to break that toxic cycle. I couldn't have done it. I was afraid of my mother my whole life, her judgment, her anger. And you weren't afraid?" "I was terrified. But I was even more afraid that our daughter would grow up thinking that humiliation is normal, that you have to tolerate toxic people just because they are family. No, I wanted to show her a different example." Eli took my hand, lacing his fingers through mine. "And you did. She sees us living honestly, with dignity, respecting each other. That is the best lesson we can give her." Several more years passed. Simone became a teenager, smart, independent, with a strong sense of self-worth. She knew the value of honesty. She knew she had to respect herself and not allow anyone to cross her boundaries. One day, when she came home from school, she asked, "Mom, what really happened to Daddy's mother? Why have we never seen her?" I took a deep breath. I knew this conversation was inevitable. "Sit down, Sonny. I'll tell you." And I told her. Not everything, of course. I didn't want to frighten her with the details, but the main points, that her grandmother was a cruel person, that she humiliated me and even hit me when I was pregnant, that she broke the law and faced the consequences, and that her father made a choice in favor of our family, and it was the right one. Simone listened intently, then nodded. I understand. You were protecting yourself and me. That's the right thing to do. And she never brought up the topic again. I looked at Eli and he smiled. We had raised a strong daughter who understood that love isn't about tolerating toxicity, that family isn't an obligation to endure humiliation, and that dignity is more important than family ties. Now, many years after that ill-fated evening, I sometimes remember the moment I stood before my mother-in-law with the envelope in my hands, the moment she collapsed unconscious, seeing the proof of her crimes. And I feel neither guilt nor regret, only the satisfaction of having made the right choice. Eli and I sit on our balcony, drinking tea, watching Simone walk in the yard with her friends. We are an ordinary family, not rich, not poor, just happy. You know, I tell my husband, your mother wanted you to marry a wealthy girl from her circle, to have a huge mansion, status, and connections. And what did you get instead? Love, he answers without hesitation. A family, a home we built ourselves, a daughter who is growing up healthy and happy, freedom from toxicity, self-respect. Do I regret it? Not for a second. He kisses me, and I smile. We saved each other. Together we walked through the fire and built a life we are proud to tell our daughter about. Somewhere else, in another city, Vivienne Dubois lives on, lonely, without wealth, without power, without family. She made her choice long ago. She chose money over people, status over love, and control over respect. And we made a different choice, and this is the result. Simone runs up to us, laughing, telling us something funny. Eli puts his arms around both of us. I feel their warmth, their love, and I know for certain we won. Justice prevailed. Not fairy tale justice, but real, human justice, where everyone gets what they deserve, where toxicity is punished and dignity is rewarded. And that is the best ending I could have imagined. I'm really glad you're here and that I could share my story with you. If you liked it, show me by liking the video and subscribing to my channel. Let's see how many of us there are. Write in the comments which city you're watching from and what time it is. I'm so curious to know where all you wonderful people are tuning in from. If you want to support me a little extra, you can also send a small donation. I share new life stories for you every single day. And now, 2 of my most popular stories will pop up on the screen so you can choose what to watch next.